The Boston City Council has limited power, but is leaving an imprint on everything from the annual budget to making policy. To bring us up to date is the Council President, Michelle Wu. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start with something that you have been working on that the Council just recently passed, and this is about language access to city government.
Yes, we just passed an ordinance on language and communications access, recognizing the fact that not everyone who needs to access city services can speak English fluently or may have another communications challenge. So this ordinance puts in place a plan for every single department to think about translation, interpretation, and assistive technology for those with disabilities.
And these days, when we're trying to switch communication more and more to 311 on the smartphone, I mean, that's a challenge you got to work on.
Yes, right now the system that the city uses when someone calls in or has a language need is that we have a volunteer interpreter pool, and it can be a little hit or miss depending if the volunteer translator or interpreter is at their desk at the time. So this really formalizes everything. It is matched with a great commitment by the mayor in this last budget cycle to put money behind it as well. So we have now a little pool of resources and a coordinator position to oversee this.
Another thing that's still in the works being developed is a kind of a municipal ID. To start with, what would this help people do that they can't do now?
There are certain communities that are disproportionately challenged in accessing an official government photo ID. And these days you need a photo ID for many things. It's not just accessing services or banking, to get into many office buildings. Or the other day I was at South Station and there was an announcement over the intercom that to ride Amtrak you have to have an official government ID. So for residents who may be undocumented immigrants, or residents who may be experiencing homelessness, or transgender residents who may have an ID that doesn't match their gender identity, this is a way to get access to an official formal ID, and we hope to tie in benefits so that this is something that everyone will benefit from.
Of course, you also have to build in safeguards to make sure that this cannot be hacked or is subject to fraud too, right?
Absolutely, and we have many systems at the city already where, for example, we are verifying information when it comes to parking tickets or paying taxes or other system, your marriage licenses, for example. So this is something that I think is doable, fills a need, and also will expand our ability to provide a service for people throughout the city.
Well, one thing the council worked on early this year, I know the mayor was heading in the same direction, and that was reducing the default speed limit. Frank Baker was very much leading the charge in that, and there's some skeptics out there. I mean, if you bring this down to something like 25, I mean, is that real? Can that really happen and be pretty much enforced?
So this was a home rule petition that Councilor Baker had proposed. We voted unanimously, and the State House adopted with some tweaks. So the first point is that we're not talking about making I-93 25 miles an hour. It's really not the major thoroughfares in Boston. It applies to what are technically called thickly settled areas. Think about residential streets. Think about those side streets where a car zooming down can really endanger kids playing in the yard or a senior trying to cross the street. There's a lot of research that shows the likelihood that you survive an accident if you're hit by a car as a pedestrian or a cyclist. There's a huge difference if the car is going 40 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour, or under 30 miles an hour.
I want to ask about a couple of things in the budget where the council intervened and changed directions to some degree, and one of them is around outreach workers in that difficult intersection, Mass Ave and Cass Boulevard. A lot of people struggling with drug addiction, trying to either move in their recovery or maybe relapsing. Talk about what those outreach workers are going to be able to do.
Yeah, so a great part of the budget this last cycle that we approved starting July 1st, July 1st, came out of advocacy from Councilor Anissa Sabi-George's committee, a new committee on homelessness, mental health, and recovery. And certainly we have, since the closure of Long Island and the relocation of many of the services for emergency shelter, we have seen an increase in the number of people on the street, struggling with addiction and recovery in that area near Boston Medical Center, near Melnia Cass and Albany Street. So the budget this year includes funding for about 25 to 30 additional staff people whose job will be triage at the Southampton Street shelter and the surrounding area.
And by the way, there's a hearing coming up on family homelessness as well,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, Councillor Sabi George will be chairing that hearing. She has been a great advocate and really thinking about how homelessness can affect every aspect. It makes it difficult to even get a foothold. So from getting an ID to getting access to your education and having stability in all aspects of seeking a job, this is something that the city really needs to dig in on and focus on.
If there's one part of the budget where I'm sure the council got an earful from many different people, it's for the Boston Public Schools. There were some recommendations earlier on, and those cuts were reversed. But then again, there were some sacrifices made with other programs. And I guess a lot of people just not too happy with this all around. How do you feel?
It was a very tough year for the Boston Public Schools budget, and this is, my third year doing my third budget since I've been on the council, and the third year in the row where it's been very difficult cuts in different areas related to education. We are getting less and less funding from the state, particularly as we're thinking about reimbursements and charter seat reimbursements. Boston Public Schools is asked to do more and more every year with less and less. So there were some very difficult conversations. Some of the cuts, as you mentioned, were reversed, but there were still schools and still learning centers that were affected and that we need to keep focusing on for next year of how we can make sure that every child has access to a quality education in Boston.
Well, there's one area where I expect some disagreement among council members, and that's on the upcoming ballot question about legalizing marijuana for recreational use for adults. You and Councillor Jackson have come out in support of that. What were your main reasons for that?
For me, it's a social justice issue. I have never tried marijuana and frankly don't intend to, regardless of what happens in November. So I approach it from the lens of someone who was very sheltered from it, didn't know even what it smelled like until college when I was a student at Harvard and saw other students using marijuana recreationally, and thinking now back on that situation of the fact that Harvard kids can smoke pot and go on to have very successful lives, continue to enjoy every opportunity and privilege, and disproportionately our Black and Latino residents face consequences and uneven enforcement. That just isn't right to me. And even the argument around decriminalization, that Massachusetts has become a state where we are not sending people to jail, incarcerating people for possession under 1 ounce, still doesn't sit right. That we can say, it's okay if you do this behind closed doors, but only if no one hears about it. That just leaves open the door for black market and everything negative that comes with it.
I want to ask you a little bit about how you operate with your colleagues on the council. You've done a couple of things that I've not seen done before. And one of them is you have these briefings with people in the media, and there is a revolving cast of colleagues talking about what they do. And you're sharing the limelight with them. In fact, sometimes they get more of it than you do. What was your strategy around that?
My goal in serving as council president was to increase our transparency and to really invite people in to understand the good work that the council already does week to week. Part of that is explaining to people what is on the docket and what everyone's interested in, what my colleagues are working on. So I'm always happy to see when you participate. We have a monthly briefing session open to any media, usually focused on ethnic media outlets and local media outlets, neighborhood papers, for example. And I like to make sure that I'm bringing in different colleagues with me each time to just have a chance to speak directly to the readers of those outlets, or sometimes radios included, the listeners as well.
Well, we also have something going just among the councilors themselves, I guess getting to know each other in some of their interests. I know Bill Linehan has gotten some attention because he's got a band, but what are you doing with that?
Yeah, in conversations with all my colleagues leading up to this term, it really became clear that everybody wanted to get to know each other better, and that real collaborative work is built upon true relationships. And we see each other a lot, but it's often in the context of in and out at a political event or some other function. So once a month, about once a month, we get together and have a councilors only lunch just to talk and catch up after the council meeting. And we rotate, each person gets a chance to bring in a speaker about a nonprofit they care about or some other issue that they really want to dig into more. And our next one is scheduled for next Wednesday. Councillor Linehan is bringing in his band and has enlisted several of us to sing and perform. So we shall see. It'll be in the mezzanine level of City Hall, so all will be able to enjoy.